Like I said, the first thing I need to do is just thank lots of people without whom I would have been lost over the last couple of years. So I want to offer my thanks to President Pollock, the Faculty Development Committee, the Office of the Provost, and the Arts Industry Residency Program of the John Michael Kohler Arts Center for their support of these projects. The art-making process is time-consuming and labor-intensive. The opportunity afforded by the sabbatical program to set aside the time and resources for the research, production, and reflection necessary to create a large body of work is just invaluable. I'd also like to thank my friends at Kohler, the artists Beth Lipman and Catherine Johnson, and Ken Sager, my tech assistant, and the men and women of the Kohler Pottery, who worked generously and without complaint to help me over the learning curve of production pottery. I also have to say that I want to thank the Birmingham Southern Art faculty that was here when I was here, 67 through 71, Virginia Rimbert and Raymond McMahon, Bob Shelton, and especially my mentor, Bob Tucker. I really owe them my life. And my colleagues, my family here in the art department, Department of Art and Art History. I'm thankful for Tim Smith's intensity and Kathleen Spee's warmth and support. Kevin Shook, whose energy and youth I seek and fail to match every day. Pamela Venz, whose heart keeps us all grounded and honest. Cooper Spivey, the smartest guy I know. And Steve Cole, my friend, who makes me laugh and challenges me to be a better artist every day. I also need to thank especially my wife and my son Colin, and my daughter Bria and her husband John Trest, who listened to me rant and whine about the difficulties at the factory, long distance over iChat, and apparently still love me. So, and I do want to take this opportunity to introduce to you my brother, Sergeant Major John Neel, U.S. Army retired, who is now the Command Sergeant Major at Virginia Military Institute. He spent his adult life with honor and valor and distinction at the service of our country. Ours is our extended family is a military family, which traces its service through every major American conflict back to the Revolutionary War and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He's sitting next also to the best mom anyone could have, Juanita Neel. All the good things about John and me come directly from her. It occurs to me that most of you out there, don't really know me from Adam. I'm old enough to be your grandfather, or at least have been classmates with your folks. So I thought I'd just start by trying to introduce myself to you and give you a little look at how I tick. I think of myself as a direct philosophical descendant of the German artist Joseph Albers. Albers believed that all education was self-education, and that self-education was best accomplished through the comparison of one's work to the work of others and to one's own earlier work. And while he believed that this process was best achieved through rigorous and systematic means, Albers also believed that art was a matter of personal, lifelong education driven from within. As an artist, I see myself as a player in a continuum of inquiry that evolves, but is always essentially political in nature. For me, that role as an artist is inseparable from the role of teacher. And as artist-teacher, I emphasize that art is a function of culture, that it is a definitively human form of communication that continues to adapt and to change and to direct the culture within which it exists. That being an artist comes with requisite responsibility, and that while artists may produce the objects of art in the seclusion of their studio, they are bound by that role to participate in the larger significance of contemporary culture and contemporary art. Now, I might as well come right out with it, okay? I'm at heart a skeptic and just a bit cynical. Okay? So I know that comes as a great shock to my friends and colleagues, but it's true, and I can pinpoint the moment it happened. That conversion from optimistic, young utopian, to the full-blown skeptical, cynical young man. It was a fall day in 1963, Woodlawn High School. I was sitting in my desk in Ms. Cown's 9th grade science class. I just turned 15 the week before, and I was bored to tears. And primarily because I was being taught nothing that my father hadn't explained to me when I was 9. So as usual, I was entertaining the classmates who sat behind me with caricatures of our principal when the door burst open. And the new, right out of graduate school, science teacher entered. And with a quivering, breathless voice, he said, "The president's been shot." No, that's not the moment. Here's the moment. Without missing a beat, Ms. Cown responded, "Did they do a good job?" So Mr. Gerald stood speechless, slack-jawed, then turned on his heels and left the room. At my desk, my own emotions quickly went from shock to disgust and anger. Red-faced, I stood up and walked out of the room. Halfway down the hall, I caught him. What happened? Is he still alive? Who? But as we all know, early on at that time, there was little he could really tell me, no details. So still staggering from the news, I made it to the restroom and threw up in the sink. It was the final stone thrown at my psyche. Fire hoses and German shepherds turned on African American college and high school students in the spring. 4 young women at church, my age at the time, killed by Robert Chambliss's bomb in April, and now John Kennedy slain in downtown Dallas. It just might as well have been Woodlawn. So much for the comfort and security of trust. Now you'll see the skepticism and delusion crop up from time to time in the work I'm about to show you. But know this, moments in our lives mark us, they define us, and sometimes entire generations succumb. In the early 80s, I had the opportunity to speak and meet the writer James Baldwin. In our all too brief conversation, we spoke about a subject that was important to the both of us, and that's the role and responsibility of the artist in society. I can't really quote from that conversation, it's been too long, but I can paraphrase a line from his work, Down from the Mountaintop. But I need to change the word writer to artist. Okay. Baldwin said that the role of the artist is not to make art, but to disturb the peace. It's our responsibility to ask questions. Or as Baldwin has said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So it's through art that we'll understand who we are as individuals and who we are as a species. And it's my goal as an artist to create in the work a balance between obsession and experience and the aesthetic strategies necessary to convey conceptual sensibilities to the greater context. The process is one of evolution and redefinition and inquiry, and comes only with commitment and consideration and risk. Indeed, risk and danger are the catalyst for art. I grew up in a household informed by my father's insatiable hunger for knowledge. He's one of those that Tom Brokaw has referred to as the greatest generation, veterans of the Second World War. He went to college on the GI Bill and his own enterprise. And after earning his degree in physics, he became a high school teacher. Unfortunately, education finances in the state were even more abysmal in 1953, and so he left when industry offered to double his salary. But he continued to teach his sons the three of us, and to instill in us the value of scholarship and discovery. Countless nights were spent outside in the yard, gazing through our telescope at the heavens, speculating about what lay beyond the earth. We watched each televised NASA mission, loaded up the car to drive to more advantageous sites to observe a solar eclipse, or bundled up against the winter cold on the top of a mountain to gaze at some interloping comet. Sundays were spent in open debate on one topic or another. My father's favorite book, or one of his favorite books, was Daniel J. Boorstin's history, The Discoverers. It is the story of humanity's long, never-ending quest for what man does not yet know. In it, Boorstin writes this: "Ours is a story without end, for the world remains a boundless stage for discoveries to come. The most important words ever written on the maps of human knowledge are terra incognita, unknown territory." The history of critical theory and art is just such a quest. And my role within that continuum is to be one of those explorers. So my mission has been to take myself and my art into unknown territory. That quest has taken me to the battlefields of El Salvador, Panama, Antietam, the serpent-handling churches of Appalachia, and the arid deserts of the American Southwest, and the rainforests of Costa Rica, pre-Columbian seaside caves in Puerto Rico, and bone churches in the Czech Republic, the site of a race murder in Kentucky, and a land swindle in Central Florida. And the work that resulted from those encounters gave me the opportunity to share my understanding of those experiences in a wide range of venues. For without a public venue, art remains incomplete, unresolved. Dialogue is fundamental. To that end, I try to engage the larger community of contemporary art and culture. This desire is not so much a personal ambition as it is an imperative that derives from the nature of the work itself, from history and theology, philosophy and political theory, amplified by the aesthetics of nature and art. I work on issues that involve national and global survival. I work on issues in the early 80s. I worked as a freelance photojournalist, reporting on the wars in Central America. And then in the 90s, the serpent handling holiness for Dennis Covington's Salvation on Sand Mountain. For me, that work was research for sculpture. That political in nature was informed by my experiences with people on society's edge, and speaks to the conflict between the rational and the emotional and the concrete and the spiritual. My role as artist is really not unlike the role I assume as a photojournalist, and that's that of observer and interrogator. And lately I've had lots of questions. This is a piece called Insurgent. IED, VBIED, WMD, RPG, 9/11, Sunni, Shiite, Al-Qaeda, Gitmo, Abu Ghraib, Al Jazeera, suicide bomber. How quickly these words and anagrams have moved into the vernacular. They color our daily conversations, they shade our future, darken our hopes, and shadow our dreams. Like predatory animals, they lie in wait for our sons and daughters. Insurgent this is the piece you see in detail here, is the bomb in the baby carriage wired to the radio. So, who's the enemy? Are we the enemy? We profess a love of freedom and for the sanctity of life and for peace, and yet we're willing to enslave ourselves to a doomed dependency on petroleum, to declare war in order to perpetuate that dependency, and to sacrifice our own sons and daughters to enable the ever-increasing profits of oil corporations. The monkey prints are a series of prints that have been a couple of years in the making. And to say that Joseph Campbell said this, that the idea of the supernatural as being something over and above the natural is a killing idea. In the Middle Ages, this was the idea that finally turned that world into something like a wasteland. So the monkey prints reference the ancient Egyptian pharaonic states with its god kings, the military states that followed, and the complicity of organized religion and its failures, the biological evolutionary process and its sociological implications. This is a piece called Contract. Years ago when I was your age, George McGovern said this, I'm sick and tired of old men dreaming up wars in which young men do the dying. In the Congo, tribal shamans use a wood carving in the shape of a human figure known as an Nkisi Nkoti as a conduit to the spirit world, okay? To heal the sick, to assure fertility or settle arguments or punish aggression, the shamans drive a nail into the statue to awaken the spirit that resides within, and then to seal a contract between the spirit world and the living. And this wooden replica of an M4 assault rifle, my students, colleagues, and I have driven a nail for each American soldier who has given his or her life in the current American-Iraqi war. As of November 12th, the Department of Defense reports that number as 4,680. This is a piece called Cultural Evolution. When Hu Yaobang, the pro-democracy communist official, died in early spring of 1989, students and intellectuals began a series of demonstrations near and within Tiananmen Square in Beijing. And on June 4th, after 7 weeks of continued protests calling for economic and democratic reforms, the People's Republic of China sent troops and tanks to quash the demonstration. According to Chinese Red Cross estimates, some 2,000 to 3,000 civilian demonstrators were killed or injured in the ensuing melee. The Tiananmen Square massacre, and immediately following what's become to be known as the Tiananmen massacre, the PRC arrested hundreds of protesters. Many of them are reported to have been executed, banned the foreign press, and purged all supporters within the party. This is a piece called Howler. The specter of war haunts our dreams, at least mine. As children, we ducked and covered. Hiding under our school desks, we envisioned the thin white contrails against the blue sky, the long silver fuselage and wide back-swept wings. We imagined the pilot in his pressure suit and helmet, the bombardier hunched over his optical, thumb poised over a large red button. We held our breath and settled into the hypnotic silence that would come before the blinding flash. If there are icons of my generation, they are the B-2 bomber and the M16 assault rifle. That they've morphed into the B-2 stealth bomber and the M4 carbine and have been joined by the car bomb gives a little solace to our dreams. They're still with us, these ghouls. New names, new tactics, new targets, tormenting the future of a new generation of children. So, My studio space in the pottery at the Kohler factory was sandwiched between the new product development engineers and the factory floor, where 20-year veteran casters made organ flushers for hospital operating rooms. Probably didn't know they had those. I didn't until I got there. And high-end sinks for the wealthy homeowner. Outside through the wall of windows that opened into the sort of a park-like factory grounds where I took my afternoon reading break, a family of wild turkeys fed daily under the shade of 100-year-old oaks. During my stay, I had the pleasure of working alongside two different artists. First, Xiaohong Zhang, an artist from China who created a very large relief sculpture that juxtaposed images of the 2008 Summer Olympics and the scenes of earthquake-ravaged Sichuan province. And then during the second half, Phoebe Cummings from Staffordshire, Great Britain, who built really very delicate porcelain sculptures that reference sod structures. I also shared half a house with a very intense Puerto Rico Riqueño who made kinetic sculptures from machine parts that he scavenged from Kohler's junk bins. So I arrived in Kohler the last week of July in 2008 in a borrowed SUV loaded with a 400-pound plaster mold of a life-size chimpanzee soldier and several small molds for 2 sets of arms. The month of June had been spent in Birmingham research and preparation for my 3-month residency in Wisconsin. First modeling a clay original of the sculpture to be cast in multiples at Kohler, and then constructing a 2-part plaster slip mold. The plan was to be ahead in the process. Having the molds ready when I arrived in Kohler would, for all practical purposes, give me about a 3-week jump start at Kohler. But first I flew to Prague to spend the majority of July in the Czech Republic. The first week was spent at the University of West Bohemia in Pilsen. Professor Steve Cole and I had been invited to teach classes during their summer program. I taught a photography and drawing class, and Steve taught a drawing mixed media offering. During the remainder of the month, I was able to visit museums and historical and archaeological sites. Here's a site where Satan buried fossils to fool us. Steve made a drawing about this later. And then later I saw medieval and Paleolithic art objects and sites that would be later referenced in the work produced at Kohler. Best laid plans. Back at Kohler, it actually took 3 72-hour weeks to get the first monkey out of a mold in one piece. Previous experience and assumptions about the material and techniques went only so far. But with the help of new product development crew and the 2 studio assistants and the advice of the professional casters, I eventually developed a formula of mold design and pouring and drying timetable and static pressure that was necessary to repeat the casting process. And so, like 1 a day. That's all the monkeys' bodies I could make until I designed and constructed a second mold from the first monkey that I had fired. Then it was 2 a day at the same time, but 2 a day. And from mid-August until the last day at Kohler in mid-October, I was able to cast 61 monkey bodies, a large number of arms, legs, bases, helmets, swords, spears, skulls, and other accoutrements. No guns. They won't let you cast guns. So the first monkey took 2.5 months from clay original to mold to casting, drying, and to the final firing. The remaining 60 monkeys required 6 days each over the remainder of the 3-month residency. The majority of the work was fired in 3 of 5 shuttle kills, loaded on large carts alongside toilets and sinks, urinals. The monkey parts, the The monkey parts were fired in a 21-hour process. If you know anybody, if you've done ceramics before, you'll know that this is an extraordinarily fast amount of time. And that 21-hour process took the dry green porcelain from room temperature to 2,381 degrees Fahrenheit and back to room temperature in 21 hours. Now, clay is the oldest, if not the oldest, art material. We have clay objects going back to the Paleolithic and maybe beyond. This one from South Africa, it's tiny, it's about 4 inches long, is at least 70,000 years old and may very well be the oldest example of art found to date. Clay is a product of erosion, microscopic bits of stone that result from the constant movement of water over rock. You find it where the bends of rivers used to be. Porcelain is a ceramic clay. It's sometimes referred to as china for the place of its origin. Its primary ingredient is kaolinite and feldspar, and various other materials depending on the specific use and formula. Now, Kohler's formula is, of course, very proprietary, closely guarded. But my friend, the ceramic artist Scott Bennett, tells me that there must be a high percentage of feldspar given that it doesn't have much plasticity. To make permanent objects from clay, the work must be heated to the point that the small particles of clay fuse. Now, depending upon the makeup of the clay, what type of rock it came from, that temperature can be quite high. The terracotta clay that you may have used in elementary school typically fires at like cone 06. That's 1873 degrees or so. The porcelain at Kohler, as I stated, is cone 10, which is 2381. The process basically turns clay back into stone. So the vitreous clay. Vitreous porcelain is a material that has both the crystalline structure of stone and the amorphous structure of glass. And because of that, it has a very low permeability to water, hence its application to plumbing. The monkeys in the gallery are made with exactly the same material that your toilet at home or the one down the hallway is made from. So back in Birmingham, by the end of October, I was able to focus on the Howler exhibition for Bare Hands Gallery and build a new piece during January. Cultural Evolution, a sculpture comprised of 5 scaled Chinese T-59 tanks and 45 small terracotta souvenirs modeled after the Qin warriors. It had stereo sound, and then it was joined by 3 other sculptures and 16 archival digital prints in the exhibition. And artist Cooper Spivey, contributed just a brilliant essay to the exhibition. So Babel really began 3 years ago. Originally, it was to be the keystone element of a larger project that would address issues of intrusive surveillance, government control of populations, and the erosion of civil liberties. And the Bare Hands exhibition was the other element. My basic premise for Babel was this. As a species, we are slow learners. In our usual kind of state of hubris, we named our species Homo sapiens, wise man. I'm unconvinced. I mean, I really think the historical record just simply doesn't support wisdom as a definitive attribute of our kind. As Professor Scott Duncan reminded me the other night, E.L. Wilson contends that our cultural evolution has really far outstripped our biological evolution. We have created astonishing technological tools that allow us to manipulate and mold our environment in ways unimaginable just 100 years ago. We've traveled to the moon, viewed the depths of space and time to the very moments after, following the bang, mapped our own genome, but we are still fighting each other over resources, territory, ideology, and fueling and justifying these murderous actions with the beliefs and tenets of millennia-old beliefs, millennia-old myths taken literally. You know, what's the aphorism for the definition of insanity? Continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So in a nutshell, that is what Babel is about. And during my research, I began to see the same patterns emerge. You know, leaders who made the same pronouncements, you know, used the same tactics across millennia, across continents. Despots, elected politicians, and spiritual and religious leaders manipulating the populace in the very same ways. At the foundation of Babel are two historical cultures. The Pharaonic ancient Egyptian culture, which lasted from about 4000 to 31 BCE, and particularly the 19th dynasty pharaoh Ramses II, and the Qin dynasty of China, which existed about 221 to 206 BCE. Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, or as the Greeks called him, Ozymandias, ruled Egypt for about 66 years. He died an old man, 90 at least. His attempts to lead his army north to conquer what is now Lebanon and Syria and Israel, and then south to Nubia and west to what is now Libya, all met with serious opposition. In fact, all the campaigns at best ended in draws or defeat. But upon his return, he was hailed as a hero. You know, when you get to tell your own story without hearing from the other side, it's easy to become a hero and maintain power. During his 8 years in office, George Bush did not grant a single interview with the New York Times, although he did grant private audiences to Glenn Beck and other talking heads from the Fox network. You know, quashing dissent in the press is the basic tool of power control. With his army, Qin Shi Huangdi unified the separate feudal provinces of what is now the eastern part of China and ruled for 11 years until his death in 210 BCE. His social and political policies called for the burning of all books other than those approved by the state, the dissolution of Confucianism and the 100 schools of thought, and the execution of scholars, many buried alive. The Great Wall, begun during his reign, and his massive mausoleum in Shanxi province, which contains some estimated 8,000 terracotta warriors, horses, and chariots, were built by a workforce of hundreds of thousands of enslaved subjects, art by tyranny. In April 1933, the Office of Press and Propaganda of the German Nazi government organized the ritual burning of un-German spirited books to end, as Joseph Goebbels said, the era of extreme Jewish intellectualism. It quashed scholarship and writers and artists, and you can dictate what people believe. Or as Hermann Goering explained later, all you have to do is tell them that they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country, he said. Now you can hear the same rhetoric any night if you want to, any night of the week, from folks like Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity. You know, the same tactics used over and over, generation after generation, century after century. The chimps in Babel wear anachronism as a means to convey these ideas. Their torsos are that of ancient Egyptians. On their heads, they wear Byzantine European helmets, enlarged so that they reference the pith helmets of British colonialism. And B-2 bombers, turned one way to represent crowns, and in the reverse to suggest Shinto and papal headgear. The apes carry machetes to reference the modern-day conflicts in Central America and the massacre of Rwandan Tutsis by their Hutu countrymen. And they carry spears and knives with Clovis points from the culture that arrived in North America about 12,000 years ago, armed with the most sophisticated weaponry of its time. And they carry staffs and crude crucifix. They wear the skulls of monkeys and mount them on staffs, each with its own symbol. The serpent, a penis, a Taino symbol, or the Iron Cross. The chimps are damaged, fragmentary, like the Chin terracotta warriors they reference. They're not all whole. Like the 40,000 wounded American soldiers who returned home from Iraq, they are missing pieces. Their physical beings, eternally altered. Only partially excavated, they are incomplete. A mystery yet to be exposed and understood. And like our knowledge of history, the fossil record, the archaeological evidence of our past and its implications for the future. The gallery is filled with sound. The words of Percy Bysshe Shelley's 1818 sonnet that uses the remains of one of Ramses' many self-aggrandizing monuments as metaphor for the hubris of man and his thirst for power. There are 50 voices, each reading this, each repeating the words of Shelley's prophetic sonnet, starting at the same time, but at different places. Their voices become unintelligible, or a babel. Now, I still have questions. Is warfare inevitable for our species? Can we not, as self-sentient beings, choose paths that do not lead to war? Are we doomed by genetics to follow this evolutionary track, or is this penchant for killing our neighbors cultural, the result of taking our myths literally? Who leads? Who follows? Who benefits? And who sacrifices? So I'm going to leave you with this from Dwight David Eisenhower. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. Thank you. Thanks. Does this pick me up? So if there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer anything technically or whatever. Sure.
Jim, you've talked a lot about the way in which art can portray issues. I just wonder where you think we are in the spectrum of this nation of government and society vis-a-vis art. And I think about Thomas Akins, who was not allowed to put pictures in
Right.
the Philadelphia exhibition, and then coming on down to the WPA, where there seems to be a lot of creativity there. But then we end up with the Mapplethorpe stuff and museums. So I just wonder, how do you judge that relationship with art and society in this country?
You know, gosh, this is something we struggle with all the time, and we sort of live in a vacuum here, to be honest. It's really difficult to sort of get, you know, some of the images, the oil barrel images actually were in an exhibition with Darius Hill and Larry Anderson from Alabama. Darius Hill, who's the chairman of the art department at School of Fine Arts. When that show opened, it opened, 2 years ago, I guess, in the last part of November. The local TV stations, for instance, came out, filmed it, interviewed some stuff, and we're going to come back for the opening and do a big piece on it. And I thought, well, this is cool because this, you know, this show deals with issues of gender topics, with race, and with the anti-war pieces that you saw. They didn't show back up, and when we asked why, well, they decided to send the reporter to cover the Alabama-Auburn game. So now I'm a football fan. You got to don't get me wrong. I mean, I watched the Alabama-Auburn game the next day, but really, you know, I thought they probably already had enough reporters there that could have covered one more story. And I think it's just sort of typical of things. The Mapplethorpe thing that you're, there are a couple of places like, you know, John Michael Kohler folks with their residencies that have sort of pulled up the slack. But what we got from the Mapplethorpe industry incident is that there are no longer any National Endowment for the Art grants for individual artists. You know, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Almost everything that we know about culture, about our existence, comes from art objects. Why wouldn't you, as a nation, promote those things? Why wouldn't you promote the arts as fundamental to who we are? It's the one thing, you know, crows count. You know, they don't make art, but it's the one thing. It's one definitional thing that says that we're human, is that we make art. So, if there's anything fundamental to who we are, you know, it's the arts. And so, why would you not promote your arts and the artists? Now, danger, of course, with that is, well, some of them may say things that you don't like, or give you images that embarrass you, or question, you know, your belief systems, or your mythology. But in a free society, that's absolutely necessary. Obama just the other day, day before yesterday in China, basically said the same thing when questioned about the press, you know, disapproving of some of the things he's done. He basically said, well, but there's a free press, and they're allowed to do that, and because they're allowed to do that, we have a stronger democracy. We have a stronger country. So, did that get around to anything that you asked? Sorry. So, yeah. Anybody?
Hi.
I'm going to stay close to the microphone, or come closer.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your choice of material. Your choice of
materials,
and specifically in relation to the conceptual message.
Sure.
You know, porcelain and its history. You know,
yeah, I think you get a lot of that. I mean, the history of porcelain, you know, is a very interesting thing. I mean, you know, once we discover the Far East, it's one of the major imports back into Europe. You know, fortunes were made. You know, it's part of our vernacular. China, you know, that we eat on China. Well, it's because that's where it came from, right? So we've got that. It's a beautiful material. It's translucent. You know, we mostly see it glazed with the white stuff. You know, on the glass on the outside to make it waterproof or to keep our food from sticking to it. I chose to do it unglazed. I didn't want it shiny. I wanted it matte because I want the light to you know, to be softer on it. The porcelain was basically because that's the only thing they had at Kohler. So the residency is to either work in the foundry casting iron, or brass or something, or work in the pottery and cast porcelain. So I wanted it clay. I wanted that because it has that thing. But the other thing that it gives me too is, unlike, say, the terracotta warriors, which are that nice rich brown, reddish brown, these are sort of more ghost-like. I wanted these to sort of have a spectral sort of quality to them. So in the low light of the gallery, they don't have color. They're sort of. Does that answer? Yeah.
I would add that I think it's something that there's ceramic that used earlier, between early Egyptian models.
Right.
The sense is that they're wood.
Right.
Play between what is material, what isn't material.
Yeah. Bud and I talked about that a lot. It's just that is that representation, that idea of representation, and how far you sort of separate it from from the actual thing. So it was originally the body's taken directly from an ancient Egyptian sculpture, a wooden sculpture, which originally would have been covered with plaster and painted in naturalistic colors. But as we have it now, the plaster's gone pretty much, and it's just this beautiful wooden piece with knots and cracks and the grain in it. So the human, the likeness of a human, separated and represented by wood and plaster and paint, and then now I'm sort of copying that and representing it in porcelain. So we sort of keep removing it from reality, from the real, and then giving it other significance than it had, So the idea is to sort of make that sort of this layer of understanding of conceptual things, sort of deep.
Part of my question was just answered, I think. That's that when you're explaining and contextualizing, I come to the understanding that the soldiers themselves are duped. There's a certain sympathy that, in fact, we have with them because they themselves are being marshaled by an ideology or a religious or something. And I was wondering, where do you expect the viewer to come to that realization? As we see them, they're fairly aggressive, militaristic, frightening, and meant to be, I don't know what the word would be, menacing. But in fact, there's an undertext here that implies, and hence the ghostly nature and the slumped shoulders that they themselves are unwitting dupes to war, basically. And so that was my question. How do you expect the audience to kind of get that secondary realization that's more subtle than war is a crime against humanity?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't want. I don't want really people to think that the soldiers are duped. I think most soldiers are doing it for. Soldiers are there at service of the leaders and of the country or whatever. Basically, usually for the right purpose. Maybe not historically, but certainly ours are. But I guess that's what everybody would say. But no, I think most of them do that and they're there for honor. I think that we're the ones that are duped. I think that one of the things that I like to think about this is that this is sort of set like a chess set, which is really just basically formations of soldiers facing each other and fighting. So I sort of see that as that way also. Some of them don't have arms. They're really helpless, but they're still there. And so I think that we all, I want this to be rather a metaphor for the soldiers. I really see this more as a metaphor for those of us who misuse them. Unfortunately, I guess with our little lizard brains here or something, we need armies and we need those for defense and protection from aggression out there. But I really, really wish it was unnecessary. I really think it is. I think that we are sentient enough and smart enough and wise, if I can use that word, enough that we can overcome the biological evolution that sort of makes us into this, but I don't know. There's not much evidence of it. Is that enough downer for everybody?
Jim,
Yeah,
you
go ahead, Jay.
talked about how you could not, I guess, fabricate guns.
Yeah.
Is that something where you had to make a compromise there? Did you have a different vision? How was
Yeah,
it?
some of them would have probably have AK-47s and pistols and things like that in their hands, and they would probably so I really sort of, the only sort of modern thing that they really have are the B-2 bombers. So I probably would have had other things, other weapons, because I wanted this to sort of, I didn't want this to be all ancient stuff. This is maybe archaeology from somebody who's digging this up from the future, but we got a whole spectrum of these people. They just had, actually it was a contractual thing. It's a union shop, and it was a contractual agreement with the union that the artists wouldn't make weapons, reproduce, castings of weapons or of dead animals or overtly sexual objects. Those three things you couldn't do. You couldn't bring a dead squirrel in and cast it, for instance, or you couldn't cast a gun, but I got little penises by them and B-2 bombers, I'm not sure, so. And then I did make a mole of an AK. I just haven't gotten anything to come out of it yet. So I'd made the mole. I just didn't let anybody know, and I certainly didn't bite the hand that fed me, and I didn't try to make any. I respected their prohibitions. So. But yeah, they would have had a few other things if I'd been able to do that. I guess they missed that in the proposal. So. But this is an extraordinary residency program. They give you travel money to get you there and back. They give you a stipend to eat and live on. They give you a place to stay. They give you, I give you a bicycle to go back and forth if you want to the plant, which is only about a half a mile away, in beautiful Kohler, Wisconsin, which has two of the greatest golf courses in the world. And then all the materials you can use, all the help you can use, and 24-hour access to the plant. So I could come and go at will, work when I wanted to. The only drawback was the clay only gets pumped through the factory for an hour every morning. But I've figured out a way to store some in a big vat so that I could pour on the weekends and at night too. So it was 16, 18-hour days. Yeah, John. Hey.
Did you have any reaction from the workers in the plant? Did you have an opportunity to show them what you were doing, and did they make some interesting response?
Oh, yeah. I made really good friends there with the casters. That part of the plant, they do a lot of casting in China now and some other countries, in Mexico. So if you get a Kohler sink from, say, Home Depot, you're probably getting one made in either China or Mexico rather than in Sheboygan and in Kohler. There, most of the casting is done. The casting is done there. A lot of it is very high-end stuff, or some things they produce in small numbers, like the organ flushers, or the really high-end $900 sinks and things. So the casters there are folks that, I think the one with the least seniority there was 18 years. And some of them have been there for 30, 33, 32 years. I worked real closely with some of them. They came over and helped. They offered to do things for me. They showed me how to, how to do things. They laughed at me when I screwed up. They would come and let me know when there was a cart coming up that I could get a monkey on. They would come find me. They were just really wonderful, generous people. And I'm just the monkey man to them, huh? Sorry?
I was wondering more about reactions to what you were
To the work?
Yeah, it seemed.
This was just before last year's election. The place was pretty much a microcosm of the rest of the world. Although I do have to say that, I made there were a lot of, union shirts for Obama around, and so I was preaching to the choir a lot with that. A lot of them say it that way. Although the head guy who was loading it, he'd give me kind of a sideways look, when I told him what he was about, but Mark and I got along really well. So, no, I loved working there. It was great. I'm just glad I'm not doing that every day of my life, though. It was really heavy and hot. In the pottery, you have to keep the temperature. You have to keep the temperature up. So even though it was the summer and it was 85 degrees outside, they would turn the heaters on. So I think that's the end of our time. Thank you. Thanks for coming.